you. So I'm here to talk to you about bin Laden, but I want to actually start my story by talking about this guy, Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh is an interesting guy. He's an American journalist. He's from Chicago. He actually went to University of Chicago for his undergrad, where he majored in history. And then he graduated, and he was like, oh, what do I do now? Right? What kind of job can I get with a history degree? He struggled. He ended up going to law school. Didn't really work out for him. Dropped out of that. Ended up working at Walgreens. It's pretty miserable doing that until eventually he made his way into journalism. And if you think that's weird, it kind of makes sense. I mean, history prepares you to think critically, to do research, to write. So it kind of made sense that he found himself doing journalism. And by this point, we're in the late 50s, right? So he's working as a journalist, and he eventually starts covering some stories during the Vietnam War. In 1969, Seymour Hersh gets famous when he breaks a story about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam and the American cover-up. Now, Hersh broke this story about a mass killing of several hundreds of unarmed civilians in South Vietnam in March of 1968 that were perpetrated by about 20 some odd members of the U.S. infantry. The U.S. government tried to cover it up by claiming that there was a much lower death toll than there actually was, and by claiming that most of the dead were the enemy, the Viet Cong, not civilians. So when Hersh broke the story in 1969 of what really happened, it resulted in a major boost to the anti-war movement, which eventually resulted in the Americans leaving Vietnam. Hersh also played a role in exposing the American mistreatment of prisoners at Abu Ghraib in 2004. He's actually published a lot of reports where he's alleging U.S. government cover-ups, not just here, but in Iraq, in Iran, and in Lebanon, greenlighting an Israeli attack there. But why am I talking to you about Hersh today? Well, most recently, just last month, Hersh broke a story about the 2011 raid in Pakistan against Osama bin Laden. Now, the raid took place in Abbottabad 4 years ago this May. It was called Operation Neptune Spear. And Hersh alleges that most everything you think you know about this incident is wrong. Okay, so what do you think you know? What is it that we think we know? What is it that we've been told? The official version of this story is that the CIA discovered bin Laden by tracking a low-level al-Qaeda operative, and that the Pakistani government, the Pakistani military, the Pakistani intelligence had no idea that bin Laden was there, and had no idea that the Americans were getting ready to raid his compound. Okay? And lastly, the official US version claimed that if bin Laden had surrendered, he would have been taken prisoner. Right? He was only killed in self-defense. The compound bin Laden was staying at was being used as a command center for al-Qaeda, worldwide terrorism. Bin Laden's body was taken into custody and buried at sea. Why buried at sea? So that there would be no physical site that could serve to make him a martyr. And of course, the body was buried according to Islamic law, and none of the sailors on board of the American ship were allowed to witness the burial. So that's the official story. Hersh's version of the story is quite different. Hersh says, well, bin Laden had actually been Pakistan's prisoner since 2006. Apparently, he and some of his wives and some of his children had been living in the mountains in between the Pakistan and Afghani border since 2001. By 2006, the Pakistani government found him by bribing some tribal folks who lived up in those mountains and betrayed him. They grabbed him and they forced him to live in a high-security place, Abbottabad, which is essentially where Pakistani's equivalent of Westminster is, and there's a lot of military folks who are there, and it's close to the capital city. So they kept him there under forced house arrest. along with some of his wives and some of his sons. And when they found him in 2006, according to Hirsch, bin Laden was pretty sick. So the Pakistani government even hired a doctor to take care of him, to treat him while they had him in custody. Hirsch doesn't stop there. He says the Saudi government knew about this and gave Pakistan financial aid to keep bin Laden under house arrest in secret and not tell the Americans. Why? Because, maybe for a couple of reasons. Hirsch thinks because the Saudis didn't want bin Laden talking to the American government and letting them know just how much the Saudi government was involved with al-Qaeda. Okay. So if this is true, how did the Americans find out? According to Seymour Hirsch. Well, in 2011, the CIA learned about bin Laden's whereabouts from a former Pakistani intelligence officer who tells them this in exchange for most of the $25 million bounty on bin Laden. Hirsch explains that when the CIA hear this, they immediately need confirmation that it's really bin Laden there. Once they decide it really is him, they both bribed and blackmailed the Pakistani government into agreeing to the raid. They promised to keep giving Pakistan a lot of financial aid to fund counterterrorism there. And if they did not agree to letting the Americans raid the compound, Hirsch says the American government threatened to leak the information to the world that Pakistan had been keeping bin Laden there. That would be a problem for Pakistan for a lot of reasons, obvious reasons. It would upset Afghanistan, but it would also upset a lot of people in Pakistan because at the time, bin Laden's popularity was quite a bit higher in Pakistan than it was, than the American popularity was in Pakistan. Okay. So the Pakistan government agrees to this very reluctantly, but they've got some rules. First, they say, we'll allow the Americans through, we'll make sure that our forces don't interfere with the raid, but you have to keep your group small. So 2 Black Hawk helicopters will do, okay. You have to pretend that you didn't find him in Pakistan. You have to pretend that you got him through using a drone strike in the mountains on the Afghani side of the border. So it doesn't look like he was anywhere here. And third, you have to kill him. You can't take him prisoner. Okay. So that was the plan. The Americans worked closely with Pakistani intelligence to get details of the compound that bin Laden was kept at. The Americans then reconstruct that compound in Nevada, where the SEALs train, rehearsing the attack. Okay. All right. So the SEALs, according to Seymour Hirsch, the SEALs go in, finally. They do the raid. And when they get there, they know that they're going to kill bin Laden. They know that they're not taking him prisoner. Doesn't matter if he fights back or not. It doesn't matter if he surrenders. They know they're going to kill him. They're actually so excited when they get there that they shoot him up so badly. According to Seymour Hirsch, his body was ripped apart by rifle fire, except for his head, which had only a few bullet holes. The rest of his body was so mutilated, there really wasn't much of a body to take into custody. Now, for some detail on the actual raid, according to Hirsch. Well, Pakistani intelligence had round-the-clock security at bin Laden's compound, right? But they were ordered to disappear as soon as they heard the American helicopters coming in. And the Pakistani government shut the electricity off to the town to make a complete blackout. All right, great. Something went wrong. Maybe because it was so dark, maybe there was pilot error, we don't know exactly, but Seymour Hirsch says something went wrong, and one of the American helicopters crashed inside bin Laden's compound. Well, that makes a lot of noise, right? A lot of fire. And all the communication gear and navigation gear had to be destroyed by grenades. So more explosions, more noise, right? But no police show up. No military shows up, even though this is a highly militarized town. No fire trucks show up. And the SEALs continue with their job. Seymour Hirsch even says that the SEALs had a Pakistani intelligence person working with them to guide them through the compound. And a backup helicopter was at a nearby Pakistani intelligence base that then started getting ready to go and rescue them because one helicopter had gone down. All right. The SEALs get to this compound, according to Seymour Hersh. They find no resistance there because the guards have been ordered to leave by the Pakistani government. They find no weapons there. Right? The Pakistani intelligence officer leads them directly to the room that bin Laden is staying in, and the only shots fired are the shots fired by the SEALs shooting bin Laden. All right. Then what happens? Well, the SEALs wait for about 20 minutes for that backup helicopter to show up, during which time they grab a couple of things that they see, not 15 computers like the US official version says, not lots of secret vital intelligence information, but a few books, a few papers. They stuff them into their backpacks. And then their secondary helicopter comes and takes them out of there. So Seymour Hersh is arguing that bin Laden was not running a major command center. He's living in a room with iron bars on the window and barbed wire on the roof. Now, although the Americans had promised the Pakistanis to pretend that bin Laden was caught in the Afghani side of the mountains instead of Abbottabad, the downed Black Hawk helicopter made the story a problem. So, according to Hersh, the administration decided to get out in front of the story and tell you the version of events that I started this talk with, right? That the CIA discovered bin Laden by tracking an al-Qaeda operative. They confirmed it was bin Laden actually by using DNA from an organization that was giving hepatitis B vaccinations. I'll talk to you more about that in a second. That the Pakistani government, Pakistani military, Pakistani intelligence had no idea about the US being involved, right? They do this all about on their own, and that they recovered lots of sensitive information. Okay. That, according to Seymour Hersh, is all lies, right? And because of that set of lies, more lies had to be created to clear up all the inconsistencies, right? The lie that bin Laden was supposed to be taken alive. The lie that Pakistanis had no idea where bin Laden was. The lie that there was a firefight in which the SEALs killed 4 other people in addition to bin Laden. One of his sons, one of his wives, and 2 others. Now, those of you who follow this story might say, well, what about the 2 former Navy SEALs who went public after this raid? Right? One of them published a book, one of them gave an interview to Fox News, and they talked about how intense the firefight was, how this was no easy day. That was the title of one of the books. What about that? Well, according to Hersh, there are some reasons why those 2 Navy SEALs might have a totally different story than his version. First, it's psychological. For the Navy SEALs to go and kill like this, there has to be a reason, right? Otherwise, it's just murder. So we have to sort of invent this idea that there was a firefight. And besides, what SEAL is going to roam around and say that they had an easy day, right? That's what Seymour Hersh is arguing. The second reason is because if they admitted there was no firefight, then people would ask, well, where were bin Laden's guards? And that brings up the question about the Pakistani government's role in all of this. So that's why the Pakistani government goes along with this. Now, if Hersh's story is not bad enough at this point, it gets a little bit worse. Remember when I said the official US version said that they got the DNA from a hepatitis B vaccination? Well, the guy who was giving hepatitis B vaccines really was a CIA asset. And he really was giving those vaccines, but he was getting money from the CIA as well to give information. He never dealt with bin Laden. Another Pakistani doctor did, the one that the Pakistan government had hired to treat bin Laden because he was sick. That's the guy who gave the DNA confirmation to the US government for a part of that $25 million. But the guy giving the vaccinations is the one who the American government decided to scapegoat, according to Seymour Hersh, because they didn't want the story to get out about how they really found out about this. So not only does that guy giving hepatitis B vaccines end up in 33 years, convicted with 33 years of prison in Pakistan, but Pakistan government cancels all vaccination programs for the poor. So the public health is potentially compromised as well as a result of this cover-up. Now, when it comes to the story of burying bin Laden's body at sea, Hirsch says, look, there was no body to bury. Those SEALs grabbed bin Laden's head, which was really, and a few little bits and pieces of his body that were left, and threw them, scattered them out the helicopter over the mountains. Because the SEALs thought that the original story still applied. We're going to say it was a drone strike. If it's a drone strike, you don't need a body. When the SEALs get back and find out the Obama administration has already come out and said there's been an attack at Abbottabad, well, now there's a body problem. We need to show a body. But burying it at sea solves that problem as well, Hirsch says. Okay. So as you can imagine, Seymour Hersh's allegations cause a big ruckus, right? Totally contradicts the movie Zero Dark 30, right? Totally contradicts the official version of events. But some people have rejected this story, right? One of the reasons is because a lot of Seymour Hersh's sources are anonymous, right? He's really got one former Pakistani general giving him information, and everything else is anonymous. But Hirsch says, you know what, that's okay. That's how investigative journalism is done. The stories I broke in the past were using anonymous sources, right? So how do you figure out if your information is reliable? When Hirsch is asked that, he says, well, I like to sit back. I like to look at the big picture. If I notice a lot of inconsistencies, I ask more questions. I know people in high positions of power in the American government and in the Pakistani government. They've given me information since 2011 telling me something is wrong. And my version makes sense, he says. SEALs going into another country with no backup, right? With no support into a place where other Pakistanis have lots of guards doesn't make sense. They would have only done that if they felt like they were safe. And this isn't the first time the American government has done something like this. We've got precedents. In 1964, the American Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolutions that gave the president, LBJ at the time, the power to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia without declaring war. Why? Because ostensibly, an American ship was fired upon by the North Vietnamese in the Gulf of Tonkin. For a long time, people were skeptical about whether that really happened. In 2005, an NSA historian produced hard evidence suggesting that, yeah, in fact, it was a lie. We already know the story about the weapons of mass destruction to start the recent war in Iraq. So yeah, there are precedents to make what Hirsch is saying reliable. But how do you get two different governments to agree to keep a secret? That seems to be a whole lot of people who have to stay quiet. So maybe Hirsch is making this up. He's got an answer for that too. He says, look at how many people knew about weapons of mass destruction and stayed quiet. Very few come out to blow the whistle. So here's the real question. Where is the physical evidence to support Hirsch's claims? That's the crux, right? And he says he doesn't have any. Right? But he says, I didn't have any hard evidence back in 1969 when I broke the story about My Lai. He had some hard evidence about Abu Ghraib, but that this is how investigative journalism works. Oftentimes you don't have a piece of paper, you don't have the physical evidence to prove what you're saying, because that's been destroyed. So this brings us back to the fundamental question, how do you know what you know? How do you know who to believe? How do you know what really happened? This is also the fundamental problem for historians. Not that historians are the only ones that deal with this, but it's my personal favorite, right? But the issue is when you're dealing with top secret governments, you're dealing with international conflict, you're dealing with cover-ups, how do you know what really happened? Two basic ways. First, not being afraid to challenge information that you're presented with. Not being afraid to think critically about what you're being told. Not being afraid to ask questions even when people don't want you to question the issue. Right? And second is knowing your history. Right? What's happened in the past. Because the big mistake people make when they think about history is that history is about the past, and it's not. It's not about the past. It's about the present and making sense of this moment. So when you use history in that sense, the answers to these become a lot clearer. That's all I got for you.